Mark Carney sure has a penchant for announcements, doesn't he? And the problem is, those announcements lead to no action. And we're going to talk about that today. But first, I wanted to celebrate 25,000 subscribers with you because it's you who creates this channel. The reality is, I wanted to create a channel about political commentary that delivered you a video 6 days a week with new topics every single day. But what I wanted to be different about this channel than some of the other ones is the conversation we have in the comments. And each and every one of you has participated at some point in time in some of these videos in the comments, in the conversation. I try to join you with as many comments back to yours as possible and to stir up the conversation as well, because I truly believe that if we're going to actually make change in this country, we all need to do it together. And you guys have participated 100% of the time. This channel does not get anywhere near 25,000 subscribers without you. And if you had asked me 2 months ago if I thought this channel would hit the 25,000 subscriber mark, and I know, trust me, that there's a lot bigger ones out there, but the reality is, for it to get there this fast, it's all about you. And it's all about Canada trying to come together and have these conversations. Even our liberal friends, I know you sometimes put some angry comments into some of these videos, but I know you're out there. I know some of you subscribe so that you can have this debate with me, and I appreciate each and every one of your comments. Maybe not the ones that are the harshest or the swear words or the fingers up, but the other ones, if you're having debate, are always great. So thank you very much. Really appreciate everything. And let's start the show today. Well, yesterday's headline was the perfect microcosm of Mark Carney's entire governing style. A flashy announcement about investing in pay raises for Canadian Armed Forces members. It was presented like a done deal, but then the fine print really kind of tells a different story. It says, not yet, or details later, and maybe you should just trust us on this one. And look, the mainstream media's stories all teed it up perfectly. Canada announces increase in military salaries. That looks pretty decisive, doesn't it? Until you look under the hood and realize that the money, the timing, and the legal authority to even execute on this aren't actually nailed down. Let's go.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
Welcome back to Bakes on Things. I'm Chris Baker, and thanks for joining us. Happy Saturday. Let's start with what was actually announced, not implied, not hinted, but announced. The Prime Minister's own release says all Canadian Armed Forces members will receive a pay raise with increases retroactive to April 1st, 2025. It specifies 20% for starting privates in the regular force, 13% for lieutenant colonel and below, and 8% for colonel and above. It also promises a new military service pay and additional compensation initiatives to be rolled out over the next 12 months. And that last phrase is what matters the most. Rolled out over the next 12 months. That means that a sizable chunk is not live today despite yesterday's announcement, and some pieces are still vague by design. Even the release admits that details will be provided in due course, and that's just political code for we're going to figure out the hard parts later, but just trust us, you'll get this raise. So why is this being sold as a fait accompli? Well, because the announcement optics are the point here. The execution itself, the action that they need to take, can wait. That's how they feel. The 20% across the board is a mirage, and CTV and other outlets had been reporting for weeks about a 20% military pay bump. But the buried coverage in the independent media, which already called this out, had also signaled that Ottawa was considering a combination of approaches. Not a uniform 20% across the board, but the translation itself was expect a patchwork and not parity, and today's structure, or yesterday's structure, I should say, confirmed all of that. 20% only at the very bottom rung, tapering to 13% and 8% up the chain, plus add-ons to be rolled out later. If you're a CAF member who heard 20% for everyone when it was promised a few months ago, that's not what's happening here. It was never locked. The government was openly hedging on you. And this is what they do. This is something that's becoming a massive trend in this country with this government. Because here's where the spin meets the ledger, or lack thereof. There was no spring budget under this government. The Senate's own main estimate study says it plainly here, given the absence of a budget this spring. Well, instead, the government is actually operating on a 2025-26 main estimates sort of budget kind of thing. It's the legal instrument that let Ottawa spend without a formal budget, is essentially what that was. Those documents were tabled in late May, and they include billions for national defense. That's the truth. That's what they said. In other words, though, there are authorities to spend, but they're all estimate based. They're kind of still blocked, not a coherent budget plan with a deficit financing narrative and full program architecture. No, why would we provide that? That's why so many details are still forthcoming in all of this. Now, here's the thing, you have to layer in yet another fact. Parliament is not sitting. The House rose on June 20th, and it isn't scheduled to return until September the 15th. And that means no day to day parliamentary grilling of these rollout promises that are being made, and no fresh appropriations until the fall, other than what's already been passed, of course, which is one bill. Announce now, answer questions later, and do the work much later. That's what's called convenience politics, and that has been held by many failed governments across the world, not just this one. And so the PM's release itself talks about being retroactive to April 1st, and that this is the largest raise in a generation. But the nuts and bolts, the Treasury Board submissions, the implementation timelines, and how quickly those retro checks will flow to our armed forces members are exactly the parts that have been punted down the road for the next 12 months. When the government tells you the architecture and allowances will be phased in over a year, it is by definition not even close to done. And CAF members, remember the last time coming soon turned into we'll get back to you? Well, that happened fairly recently. Ottawa's own messaging in June telegraphed this would not be a simple across the board lift, and today's tiered scheme proves it. This is a pattern that's developing with Mark Carney and his government, and this is something that we want to talk about going through the rest of this episode. So let's map the major Carney announcements out since he's become our prime minister, taking office. And look, let's ask the question that matters the most. What is actually executed as of today? What is contracted? What is appropriated? Or what is actually in force out of any of these announcements that have been made? And we go back to June 9th, where Canada will hit NATO's 2% of GDP this year, with over $9 billion spent on our defense and more to follow. Well, that's a massive claim, but the details of how you count to 2%, well, especially the carve-outs and dual-use infrastructure, none of that is laid out in public appropriations because the spring came and it went with no budget. And here's the thing, Politico reported the pledge. The PMO release framed it in grand strategic terms, and the PBO estimates record shows there's no full budgetary blueprint yet at all on any of that. Just estimates, authorities, and promises for more later. Announced, yes. Verified, enacted, lasting appropriations with full program detail? No, not yet. Okay, June 25th. Let's keep moving. The even bigger, historic sounding NATO 5% defense investment pledge by 2035, split 3.5% for core military capabilities and another 1.5% for critical infrastructure and dual use. It's a pledge, not a law. There's no binding path to 5% in statute or appropriations. It's an international commitment the government will have to retrofit into future budgets and estimates if it means it. And until then, it's another press conference and an IOU. And then there's March 18th, the headline grabbing plan to buy Australian over the horizon radar for the Arctic. Remember this? Widely reported as Canadian $6 billion. Trump even got mad at this, but then it's just kind of disappeared. This is the classic Carney flourish. Big ticket, strategic capability, big number, big headlines. What's actually happened, though? Not a procurement contract. A technology partnership arrangement announced July 17th, and that's a about it. Helpful progress, sure, but an arrangement is not a signed acquisition contract that obligates Canada to pay and the supplier to deliver hardware on a schedule with penalties. So, announced, yes. Contracted, no. August 5th, a Canadian $1.2 billion support package for the software lumber industry. Just this week, 700 million in loan guarantees and 500 million for product development and diversification to cushion the blow from US tariffs and the wider tariff mess. It's all up to language, and loan guarantees must be structured, programs must be stood up, and disbursements will take time. No surprise. Great headline. Money moving today? No, that's not how any of this works. And then there's June 23rd, the EU strategic partnership of the future that a lot of Liberal supporters seem to like to think is a trade deal, but it's not. It sounds sweeping. In reality, it's a political framework to pursue some sort of cooperation down the road, but it's not a ratified treaty or trade deal, and certainly not one that overrides the tariff war or resolves Canadian exporters' day to day pain. It's aspirational branding at best without the binding teeth of legislation or an economic deal. And then, of course, today's CAF or yesterday's CAF pay raise, as we've established, it's tiered percentages, retroactive on paper, and a raft of allowances to be rolled out over the next 12 months. That is not mission accomplished. That's come on back later and see if we actually did this or not. How often does this happen? Well, the reality is what we're noticing about every 2 to 3 weeks since March. There's been a big move announcement, including the Arctic radar, 2% this year, EU mega framework, 5% pledge lumber package, and now CAF pay every 2 to 3 weeks. The cadence isn't the problem here, though. It's the emptiness that is. When each release leans on details later and in due course or over the next 12 months, the Parliament is literally adjourned for the summer, guys. They can't do any of this, and so nothing is getting done. That is the definition of governing by press releases. Where does the money actually come from here as well? Because every one of these announcements includes billions and billions. And right now, from the 2025-26 main estimates and supplementary estimates, blah, blah, blah report, which is not a full budget, the Treasury Board president tabled main estimates, this whole thing, on May 27th. And then it was summarized into 486.9 billion in budgetary authorities later on and concentrated in mostly defense. That's the pot they're drawing all of this from, though. So it's not mostly defense then. And they're making these announcements look like they're immediate, but the government's own Senate level review notes the absence of a spring budget, even warns about it, which is why you keep hearing rollout and details to follow and 12 months down the line instead of seeing a cohesive budget plan with a financing story and committee tested line items. And look, the real question I know you're asking here is, but some things did actually happen, right, Chris? Like he's done some things. Sure, he did the Canada Strong Pass, run this summer, free and discounted admissions for kids and youth at national and many provincial museums and other tourism parks and perks from June 20th to September 2nd. So if you think his summer pass is evidence of a government delivering on core economic and security challenges, fine, but it's a postcard compared to the structural promises we talked about earlier. It's also time boxed, not a durable reform. Great for family outings, of course, useless for the tariff shock or military capability gaps. So, really, it doesn't matter. That's the point. Nobody serious opposes paying our troops properly. So don't get me wrong. I think we should definitely do this. But recruitment and retention are already in crisis. What's infuriating is turning that urgent reality into yet another round of we're doing it or we're going to do it, without doing the hard, boring, visible work now, which is publish the full pay grids so that we know those, lock Treasury Board approvals, put the allowances in black and white with implementation dates, explain how the retroactive payments will be processed and our armed forces members will get paid, and when individuals will actually see that money. Instead, we get photo ops, tiered percentages, and 12-month horizons. That's not urgency, and this keeps happening. That is just simply optics. And CTV's framing of it and some of the other mainstream media plays right along with him. Carney's governing style has become very predictable. That's for sure. It's announce first, appropriate later, roll out someday down the road, but count it as a win for yourself today. The Canadian Armed Forces raise follows that exact formula to the letter. Generous on camera, hazy on how it's going to get delivered. The same with 2% this year and 5% by 2035, the radar buy, the lumber up to billions, and EU historic step. Until Parliament returns and the government tables either additional estimates or a full budget, which we would prefer for 2025, with line by line detail, these are not completed actions. They're just IOUs. If you want to lead in a crisis, stop governing by press release. Show the contracts, table the appropriations, publish the schedules, put the money in our troops' pockets now, not over the next 12 months. Because they need it now, just like the rest of the Canadians. So get to work is the bottom line here. Why is this government not actually implementing or doing anything? Like, comment, subscribe. Make sure in the comments down there you get into this conversation. Let's talk about this. I mean, how do we push this government into actual action? Pierre Poilievre just this week had mentioned that the Conservatives will table some legislation in the fall that will try to push action, because the reality is there is no action. It's just announcement after announcement after announcement after announcement. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.